Trump and his defense lawyers hit back against the narrative from Jack Smith. In light of this new January 6th indictment, we see a new player enter the game. Trump's lawyer is named John Lauro, who appeared on 2 media networks, including Fox and CNN, to defend the president against these charges, saying that there is a long history of First Amendment protections that immunize and exonerate Trump against these charges. But Trump's campaign also posted a statement. Here's what they said. They wrote, "This is nothing more than the latest corrupt chapter in the continued pathetic attempt by the Biden crime family and their weaponized DOJ to interfere with 2024, in which Trump is the undisputed frontrunner, leading by substantial margins." They say, but why did they wait 2.5 years to bring these fake charges? Right in the middle of President Trump's winning campaign for 2024. Why was it announced the day after the big, crooked Joe Biden scandal broke out from the halls of Congress? Very interesting pattern people are noticing. You know, it's like every time there's bad news for Biden, we wake up the next morning, there's bad news for Trump. Oh, Devin Archer testifies in front of Congress, we wake up, Trump's indicted. We have the whistleblowers come out, Trump gets a superseding indictment. It's just never ending. Trump says the answer is election interference. The lawlessness of these persecutions of President Trump and his supporters is reminiscent of Nazi Germany in the 1930s, he says, the former Soviet Union and other authoritarian dictatorial regimes. President Trump has always followed the law and the Constitution with advice from many highly accomplished attorneys. And this was a point we made when we read the indictment yesterday. 4 of the other co-conspirators were licensed attorneys. Trump was listening to advice of counsel. They may disagree with the advice, but that doesn't automatically make it illegal. These un-American witch hunts will fail, says Trump. And the President Trump will be reelected to the White House so he can save our country from the abuse, incompetence, and corruption that is running through the veins of our country at levels never seen before. 3 years ago, we had strong borders, energy independence, no inflation, and a great economy. Today, we're a nation in decline. President Trump will not be deterred by disgraceful and unprecedented political targeting from the Trump campaign. Now, Trump also posted a video.
Is in a very dark place right now. But even after everything the deep state has done to me, I will never give up on America. Mark my words. In 2024, we will win back the White House. We will make America great again. I have no doubt about it. They come at me from left. They come at me from right. The rhinos, the communists, the Marxists, the fascists. We will not only survive, we will be stronger than ever before. We're fighting a fight like nobody ever thought possible, and we're winning. We won in 2016. We had a rigged election in 2020, but got more votes than any sitting president. We're going to win like never before, and we're going to make America great again. I can truly say, I believe, better than ever before. Thank you for all of your support and for all of your prayers.
Right on. So that's Trump sounding good, looking good, saying we're going to continue to march forward. Any of this nonsense is not going to be a deterrent. And Trump's lawyers are also hitting the airwaves. From Jonathan Lauro, he showed up on Fox News and he had this conversation.
So what Mr. Trump did was exactly constitutionally precise and in order. There was nothing illegal about that, and he was required to take steps as President of the United States to ensure that that election was held in a valid way. All of that now is being criminalized. The one thing I will say, though, in 2020, Mr. Trump's campaign had a few weeks to gear up and present evidence, and it was very difficult. We now have the ability in this case to issue our own subpoenas, and we will relitigate every single issue in the 2020 election in the context of this litigation. It gives President Trump an opportunity that he has never had before, which is to have subpoena power since January 6th in a way that can be exercised in federal court.
What you're talking about,
it is going to be a possibility. I don't know how much leeway they're going to have with this because the judge is the judge, Judge Sue Chutney. We just went through that and learned about what she thinks about Trump and the J6ers, and it's not much. So she's going to do what she can to limit this thing. And we saw this predicament pop up in the Proud Boys trial. The Proud Boys defense attorneys wanted to show that there were a bunch of federal informants in the crowd that instigated the whole thing. And they said, well, what did those federal informants over there and over there and over there and over there have to do with your client over here? And well, he did this here, and he went in here, and he did this. So it's irrelevant. And they said, well, it's just, and the defense said, well, it's part of the totality of everything. I mean, the whole thing wouldn't have happened but for the feds. And so when Trump tries to go and get access to the undercovers, or goes to try to peel the layers back in Georgia, or what happened in Arizona, because they're all listed in there, he can have conversations. We know Rusty Bowers from Arizona went and testified in front of Jack Smith. So he certainly will be able to get into this and cross-examine and interview and do all the things. But at this point, the judge is, in my opinion, going to limit this as much as possible. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that they do have free reign to do all of it. But we have seen how this works out of D.C.
The states did that. Each individual state certified the elections. They were signed by the governors, many of them Republican governors, and many of them Republican secretaries of state that signed off and certified those election results before they came to Washington, D.C., and we had what was January 6th. So what you're talking about was done. It was certified.
No, I'm sorry, but you're missing what Professor Eastman's advice was. Professor Eastman said that the state legislatures had not opined and weighed in on the changes that had been done in those various states. And what they've really done is invited now a relitigation of 2020, but this time in a criminal court, which is unprecedented. No sitting president has ever been criminally charged for his views, for taking a position. And by the way, is there any doubt there's two systems of justice in the United States? Was Hillary Clinton prosecuted for the Russian hoax? Were those individuals who said, don't worry about the Biden laptop because it's just Russian disinformation? Are they?
No, a lot of people have not been prosecuted. In fact, why didn't they prosecute Al Gore when he thought that he won? I mean, he obviously didn't win against Bush, but he said he did, and they were going to fight and blah, 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 all that stuff. What about all of the Democrats? 20-something minutes of them screaming about Trump stealing the election from them. We had Jamie Raskin, who was objecting on the floor of the House. Why has he not been investigated? They cry foul. Hillary Clinton, too. I won an election. She hems and haws about it all the time. But no, they're not going to prosecute these people, and they're going to say that the states certified the elections. But we're going to revisit this because the issue is about what happens when you have two competing branches in a state that have a difference of opinion. What happens when the state legislature says one thing, but the executive branch says another thing? When the Secretary of State and the governors change the election rules because COVID, they do it outside of the context of the legislature, which has full authority to make those changes. And when the Secretary of State certifies their electors and the legislature says, you did it in violation of the rules because we didn't endorse those things, we now have two competing legitimate entities that are proposing alternative outcomes. What happens when that lands in front of Congress? That's what we're talking about. And that's the argument that Eastman was creating. We'll come back to that. Now, Lauro also showed up on CNN and had an interesting conversation with Kaitlin Collins explaining and defending the president.
Those are secretaries of state who were making those changes in those states because of the pandemic that was happening. You talk about free,
but also outside of permission of the legislature. And the Constitution says the legislatures, the state legislatures, conduct the elections, not the Secretary of States and COVID.
Jack Smith noted Trump's right to free speech and to contest the election results. But what he says in this indictment is that when that did not work, the defendant, your client, pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results. And that is why he is being charged here, not because of anything related to free speech.
Yeah, but that's factually inaccurate because the ultimate request that Mr. Trump made to Vice President Pence was pause the vote counting, allow the states to weigh in ultimately and audit or recertify. And under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, the actual responsibility for qualifying electors is in the state legislatures. Yeah. Mr. Trump had the advice of counsel, Mr. Eastman, who was one of the most respected constitutional scholars in the United States, giving him advice and guidance. That's pure politics. You may disagree with it, and people have spirited arguments about the law all the time, and that's why lawyers are in business. But we've never had a situation where a spirited debate about the Constitution has become a criminal case. What's going to happen when there's a Republican administration? Is there going to be an effort to criminalize speech by Democrats?
Only
against Democrats. Is there going to be an effort to characterize something that a Democrat politician says that's
indict all of them.
That doesn't meet some kind of truth standard at the Department of Justice?
handcuffs.
that that's going to be the subject
Gulags.
of a criminal indictment.
Round 'em up.
We've now entered a constitutional abyss as a result of this indictment.
But John, I should note that you're saying that he was just asking him to send them back. No, I was just talking to the chief of staff who was with Pence that day. He said he was being asked to do something illegal that Pence did not have the right to do, to reject
gonna
him.
talk
And
about
you mentioned
that.
the attorneys there.
We're going to come back on that one. Pence keeps saying that. He comes to this legal conclusion like, oh, I didn't have that legal authority to do that. That's not true. They changed the Electoral Count Act in 2022 to fill that gap, to close that hole, because Pence did have it back then in 2020.
That you say John Eastman, he's a co-conspirator in this indictment. I should note, in the indictment list all of the people who told Trump that his claims about election fraud weren't true, including the vice president, senior Justice Department leaders, the director of national intelligence, CISA, which of course is in charge of making sure elections in the U.S. are secure.
She's like, oh, they also signed a letter too. 51 of them signed a letter and they gave it to him and he still rejected it. Yeah, take your letter and shove it.
Senior White House attorneys, campaign staffers, state legislators that you just mentioned there, in the courts.
Right. What was not true? That there were states where ballots were sent out without people asking for them, where there were changes in verification, where there were instances where ballots were not being supervised at drop-off places. The president was told, given advice, that under these circumstances, the state legislatures have the ultimate ability to qualify electors. He followed that advice. Now, you may disagree as to whether or not those things actually occurred or not.
A lot of other people might too.
That's why we have political debate. We don't have criminal trials over that. We have the discussion like we're just having.
But it matters if those things actually occurred or not, John.
Not under the First Amendment.
But it matters if those things actually occurred, because
not at all, because under the First Amendment,
it does matter if there was actually fraud.
No, the First Amendment allows.
But John, let me stop you there, because if he's saying that there was fraud, the First Amendment doesn't allow the President of the United States to go and claim there was fraud when he was told there was not fraud, and then try to subvert the election by overturning legitimate electors. I mean, it says it right here in the actual indictment.
Absolutely, the First Amendment protects all speech.
It's his opinion.
If we're going to have a situation where the Department of Justice is going to fact-check politicians
and charge them with
and
crimes?
indict politicians for political speech, and whether or not they're factually accurate, then this country will shut down politically, because it's a never-ending cycle of tit for tat. And that's the risk of injecting politics into the criminal justice.
By her own standard, she says if they just say that there's fraud and there's no fraud, well, then they can't say that, and we have to prosecute them. And that's like literally every politician's sentence out of their mouths every day. They tell us something, it's not true, we find out it's true, and nobody gets indicted for it. And so it's about differences of opinions, and the reason is because it's a difference of opinion. They say, no, our gas prices are coming down. No, they're not. Are you going to indict them for that?
Justice system. So right now, people disagree with President Trump. What's going to happen 4 years from now if somebody disagrees with President Biden in terms of what he said during the election?
Yes.
That's why we don't criminalize political speech. Political speech under the First Amendment has an almost absolute protection. Nobody gets to judge whether it's true or not except the American people. And we do that in an election. We do that in an election. We do that in the case of a president by impeachment, but we don't indict people for speech.
I got to stop you there. But Trump is not being indicted for lying here. He is being indicted for using unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and trying to subvert the election results.
What does that mean? That's not a criminal charge. I mean, that's not the charge we saw.
Well, what's the unlawful means? There was an effort to get alternate electors.
That he was trying to overturn
which is a protocol
fake electors who were not legitimate.
Going through the process.
That was used in 1960 by John Kennedy, and it was a protocol that was constitutionally accepted. So there's nothing wrong about that. In fact, in the indictment itself, it doesn't allege that there was anything wrong. And the final ask that Mr. Trump made to Vice President Pence was simply pause the voting. There's nothing inherently unconstitutional or illegal about that. In fact, he had an opinion from a very well-known constitutional scholar that said that's fine, that's legal. Mr. Trump is not a lawyer. He's a businessman.
His own attorney general and officials said that was not fine, that was certainly illegal that he was asking. And they weren't just asking for a pause. He was asking to overturn the legitimate results. But John, let me ask you, because you're running point on this. Is Trump going to show up in person?
He was asked.
Let me ask you this. Is Trump going to show up in person for his arraignment on Thursday?
That's up to the court. the court makes those decisions. So we're prepared to follow whatever the court rules are.
John,
the judge issued a summons, and he will appear either virtually or in person.
Okay, so it's not clear if it's virtually or in person. But one thing to get back to there, he's not just asking for a pause. Your client.
No. You have to look at his last.
John, your
you have to
client
look
is
at
on
what he
tape.
said. You have to look at what he said at the ellipse. Have you read the ellipse
John,
speech?
you got to let me finish my point
No.
here. Your client, John,
when you look
is
at the
on
ellipse
tape
speech,
with
that's
the
exactly
former
what he said.
The Secretary of State of the state of Georgia. John, you got to let me finish my point here. I'm letting you finish your point.
Absolutely.
But your client
ahead.
is on tape with the Secretary of State from the state of Georgia, asking him to find him one more vote than he would need to win the state. That's not asking for a pause. He's asking for votes that he did not get in that election.
He was asking for the Secretary of State to identify votes that were not counted properly and factor that in. And by the way, that discussion took place with dozens of people on a phone call with lawyers involved, and no one was suggesting doing anything illegal.
Every election.
And no one during that call said, Mr. President, that's beyond the bounds. This is politics. This indictment is about pure politics. We engage in vigorous debate in this country about politics. What we don't do is criminalize political speech.
We do now.
This indictment is a game changer. It's the first time that we've taken political speech and said we're going to criminalize it by the party that's in control against the party that's contesting the next election, where the two individuals involved are going to be running for office.
Yep.
That is an incredible set of circumstances.
Yep, and they all just keep excusing it like it's nothing.
John, if you believe that you have a good defense here for your client, do you believe that this trial should happen before the 2024 election?
It should not interfere with the election, but really what the indictment has done is identify 7 states
but should it happen before the election?
Where there were irregularities. I need to look at what so-called evidence is going to be presented. I could see this trial lasting 9 months or a year.
Yeah,
but it's going to take. Mr. Trump is entitled to a defense. The government has had 3 years to investigate this, and now they want to rush this to trial
right
in the middle of a
election.
Political season. What does that tell you?
That they're corrupt.
We deserve as much time as any American citizen to defend on these issues as anyone else. And for the government to have 3 years to do it and then expect us to do it in 3 weeks or 4 weeks is just ridiculous. Every single person in the United States is entitled to due process, including the former president.
Okay,
and we'll see if the judge gives it to them. John Lauro, very good job. I thought that was excellent with Kaitlin Collins. She did not like that at all. And they're having a hard time defining what they're so upset about. They keep using these giant platitudes. Well, he undermined the election, interfere. I know, but what specific conduct? He's got 4 charges in there. You got to define it very, very clearly. And he put it 45 pages. And a lot of that stuff is protected speech, if not all of it. So what is he going to do? Jack Smith going to continue march forward, and Trump is going to have him and his day in court, and maybe other co-conspirators maybe joining him as well. One co-conspirator is Rudy Giuliani, and he got a copy of the indictment. He was very unhappy with it.
And I guess you have to be careful what you say. He still is the special investigator, the special prosecutor.
I kind of long ago
yours and others' future. Go ahead.
Long ago stopped being careful, and I don't worry about the Jack Smiths of this world. I have a chapter in my book called Stand Up to Bullies. So here's what I say to Jack Smith. After the Supreme Court threw out your case, which should have been a disgrace, and you should have gone and found another profession because you don't belong in this one. This one will be your legacy, violating the right of free speech of an American citizen. Never mind whether he was president or not. It could be anybody. It could be a homeless person. You don't get to violate people's First Amendment rights, Smith, no matter who the hell you are, or no matter how sick you are with Trump derangement syndrome.
Get him, Rudy.
And this isn't the first time you've acted like an unethical lawyer. It should be the last.
Yeah! Get him, Rudy! Yeah, man. So slam that indictment down, because this is going to be a long road ahead. And we're going to see some very interesting constitutional arguments and how this goes. We'll know more about it on Thursday when the judge conducts the arraignment. And my friends, will continue to cover. Thank you for subscribing and following along wherever you're watching this as we continue to cover.